In this video, we are going to look at the Basics panel. Over here to the panels, click on the arrow for the drop down to open up the Basics panel. And we've got a few things to think about. We're going to look at the histogram. Looks like we've got some white areas and some black areas to bring back. It's telling us that our shot was at ISO 100, 24 to 105 lens, shot at 26mm, f/22 at 1/10 of a second. We've got some information here to work with. We can just use an auto edit if we want. Click here. It doesn't look bad. I can click off to take it back. So sometimes you might want to click on auto and see what it looks like. You can click it and make it into a black and white. I'm going to turn that off because I want it to be in color, but just know that you can start there. Next up we have profiles. Profiles and white balance. Do you want to keep your image looking true to the scene? Then we're going to play with white balance. If you want to give it a style or a look, then you might want to play with profiles. So let's look at the profiles. We can click here and we've got a drop down of Adobe Color, Adobe Landscape, Adobe Portrait, Adobe Standard, Adobe Vivid, and Adobe Monochrome. When we click on these, we're getting this sort of adjustment. But if I click over here, now I have those same things and I can just click on each one and you can see the image changing. But it gives us a variety of other ones. Adobe Raw settings, should be Adobe Color, some different monochromes. Camera matching, so camera matching, I've got a Sony camera, so some of these are some of the presets in my camera. And some of these look pretty good. Some fun things down here, let me close up a few more of these. Adobe Raw, we've got artistic, and then you get in some fun color, funky color things. Some black and white options. Some are more contrasty, some are flatter. You also have modern looks. A lot of times I like this modern number 7. But you guys can play around. And then you've got some vintage looks. Okay, so you can dial in one of those to start with. But I'm just going to go back, and when I hit back here, right here below the histogram, it says back. That takes us back to the Basics panel. I'm just going to use the eyedropper, and I'm going to click around on some things I know are neutral colors, a neutral gray, just like when we were using levels and curves. So that made it warmer. That's a little bit more neutral. I think I'm liking that. And remember, I'm just clicking around, seeing what I like. I'm just going to dial it in. Okay. I like it right about there. So I'm at 7,000 for my temperature and a +2 in my tint. Looking pretty good. Now, back up here to check out this histogram. I've got blacks I can bring in and I've got whites I can bring in. So I'm going to go down to the bottom of the Basics panel. Well, to the bottom where it says black. And I'm going to push the blacks over. And when I do that, notice the histogram moves. And the first point where I start to get that warning, I'm going to stop. I'm going to pull it back slightly. If I keep pushing it, I'm going to lose detail in my blacks. I'm going to do the same thing with the white. I'm going to push it to the opposite side, to the white side. And if I went all the way, I can blow out highlights if I go all the way that way. So don't be afraid to push it and, see what happens. You can always reset things. Okay. So that's looking pretty good so far. The shadow slider opens up shadow detail. Give it a little bit more shadow detail. The highlight slider works really well if we had anything that was really bright white in here, but we don't, so I'm just going to reset it. To reset it, I just double click down the slider. Contrast. I do think I want to add a little bit more contrast, and that's going to make the darks darker and the whites whiter. You have to be careful when you're pushing the contrast not to make things look gray if you're pulling contrast down, or to lose detail in your whites and blacks. So it's a dance. So you might think it needs something and you might go back and tweak it somewhere else. And then my exposure looks pretty good. Sometimes I just give it a little bit of a bump, because a lot of times in printing, your prints look darker than you think they should. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now we've got texture, clarity, and dehaze. So texture adds some texture, and it's less. I'm going to go up to 100% so you can kind of see. I'm going to click on that hand tool for a moment so I can move things around. So you can see the texture just kind of popping out the detail. Double click on it to reset it. Now, clarity does the same thing, but it's more intense. So sometimes it's a dance between the two. Sometimes you use a little one, a little the other. Sometimes you use all one, all the other. It's up to you. A lot of times it's a good idea to look at it at 100%. But I'm going to go back to fit in window for a moment. Reset these. And I kind of like to look at it both ways. So I'm going to give it a little bit of clarity and a little bit of more texture. Dehaze, if you had haze in your photograph, like a mountain scene, you could throw that in. Some people I know like to use dehaze even on images like this because it just makes it look more dramatic. I'm not going to do that though. There's not a lot of vibrance or saturation in this image, so we'll play with that in another video. And that's kind of your overview of the basics panel. So give this a try. I always start with the black and white and work up.